All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today to learn more about what's going on in the family courts around the country, and learn more about the solutions and what's out there to help keep protective parents and their children safe. My name is Ashley Rumschlag. I am the National Director at DomesticShelters.org at the Alliance for Hope International. Alliance for Hope International, really quickly, is a national nonprofit dedicated to breaking the cycle of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse, and human trafficking. The organization works to create hope-centered communities where survivors can heal and professionals have the tools to provide compassionate, effective support. Alliance for Hope is an alliance of many different programs. The Family Justice Center Alliance supports more than 150 family justice centers across the U.S. and abroad, bringing law enforcement, advocates, counselors, and prosecutors together under one roof to provide coordinated trauma-informed services for survivors and their children. The Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention is the nation's leading resource on one of the most lethal forms of abuse, strangulation. It provides training to identify and respond effectively to strangulation, often a key predictor of future homicide. Camp Hope America is the first evidence-based mentoring camping program for children impacted by domestic violence, helping them build resilience, self-esteem, and vision for a brighter future. And the Legal Justice Network connects survivors the Justice Project connects survivors with trauma-informed legal professionals who understand the challenges of navigating family court and the legal system after abuse. Another major initiative that I'm in charge of here is DomesticShelters.org, which is the most comprehensive online resource for domestic violence information and services in North America. The site connects millions of people to shelters, housing, and legal help and educational content, and serves survivors, advocates, journalists, policymakers alike. Today, Alliance for Hope International and DomesticShelters.org are transforming the way communities respond to violence through collaboration, accountability, and most importantly, hope. As I mentioned at the top of this, we are here to discuss the status of family court systems in the United States. For some context, each year more than 500,000 couples in the United States end their marriages, and for roughly 1 in 4 of them, domestic abuse is part of the story. That means that tens of thousands of survivors are entering a family court system that was never designed to recognize the patterns of coercive control and post-separation abuse that define so many of these cases. In states like Connecticut, more than 30,000 people file for divorce each year, and the small percentage of cases that go to trial often represent the most complex and dangerous situations where control, manipulation, and fear don't end when the relationship does. Yet our courts often treat these cases like ordinary custody disputes. While divorce rates have declined overall, the number of survivors forced to navigate the family courts that minimize or misunderstand abuse remains alarmingly high. The result is that too many victims are re-traumatized by the very system meant to protect them, and too many children are caught in the crossfire. Again, thank you so much for being here today. We have a wonderful group of people here to talk on the subject, but I'd like to start with
What
Danielle
happened?
Pollack.
Oh my gosh,
Is the
something,
family?
I
Oh,
lost
Danielle.
it. I
Oh,
lost the picture.
oh, we're still here, Meg. We can see you just fine.
Oh, I just can't see you. Okay.
No worries. We're still here. We can. Let's get started with Danielle Pollack, who is the policy manager for the National Family Law Center at GW Law. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I'm very excited to be here and happy to co-host this event with you from National Safe Parents Organization, which is a leading grassroots organization that brings together survivors who've gone through the family court system. And we work to advance more protective laws state by state and also federally. So it's a real grassroots movement at National Safe Parents Organization. And then in my role as policy manager at the National Family Violence Law Center at GW Law, I work closely with Professor Joan Meyer, who's one of the leading legal scholars and thinkers on the issues around domestic violence and harms to children in family courts. And so together, we develop a lot of policy and research to then hopefully implement both in policy and practice across the country. So we've been working on some major reforms, which we'll talk about in detail a little bit later. The major one is called Kayden's Law, named after a little girl who was killed in Pennsylvania, and her mom is with us today, Kathy Sherlock. Um, and we also have another mom from California who also lost her child similarly after being in family court, and the court's just not properly protecting children and addressing the dangers and harms. Unfortunately, this is a problem all across the country. We have these incidents in the worst case scenario that end in a child being killed in every state. And as we move forward with the policy reforms, we have a consistent policy across states, but sometimes in a different state, they're named after a child who was murdered in that state. Of course, domestic abuse is, it can be physical, it can be sexual assault in nature, but it also sometimes is not something visible. It can be coercive control, where the abuser is really, set on overpowering and dominating the survivor or victim's movements and money. That can be financial abuse. There, of course, can be litigation abuse. And I think our focus at both the organizations that I am at is to work towards reforming post-separation abuse, which is really after you leave. And I think a lot of people in the general public think about once you leave abuse, then you're just worrying about like getting safe housing and getting to safety and moving on with your life. And I think in a perfect world, that would be true. And in some cases, of course, that does happen. Um, but if you share children with the abuser, you're very commonly trapped in family court because family court does not really prioritize children's safety as much as they do parental rights and the sharing of parental responsibilities, even when there really is a dangerous and harmful parent who is involved in the family system. And so a lot of our reform work is focused on changing this and making a shift towards child safety. So Kayden's Law, which is a federal law, it was federally enacted in 2022, passed by Congress and signed by the president. Um, it works to incentivize states to improve their child custody laws so that a lot of these harms that we keep seeing over and over with this very similar patterns where the courts are denying or minimizing abuse evidence and looking away from it, and sometimes blaming the protective parent for being too protective or hysterical. There's a lot of sort of misogynistic tropes that are in what's happening in family court. There's also a real lack of training in family courts, that's appropriate training to teach judges and family court professionals about how abuse unfolds and perpetrator and victim behaviors, why somebody might recant when they're scared, these kinds of things. So a lot of times courts, because they're not trained well, they're misinterpreting the evidence that comes before them. And we also then, unfortunately, have a quite a cottage industry that's grown up in family courts where we have experts, expert witnesses who are paid handsomely, in some cases by abusive parents, to come and testify on, using theories that are not scientifically supported, such as the alienation concept and related concepts, to minimize the abuse claims or to sort of shift the blame to the protective parent. And we are working in our policy reforms to address these sort of key core things. So improved training, improved requirements for who can testify as an expert on abuse, a requirement for the courts to look and integrate all abuse evidence into their assessment when they're deciding where a child should go, and restricting these also unscientific treatments that they commonly order called reunification treatments, whereby they're essentially forcing a child who's afraid to go to a parent. They're forcing them together, many times cutting them off from their safe, bonded parent who they want to stay with. And sometimes that also ends up in a permanent custody switch to the dangerous parent. So Kayden's Law tackles those four key things. We've adopted it in 4 states already. We have 40 to go, so we need a lot of help. But with that, I will give time to others. And I think Meg Groff is up next, who's a longtime attorney in Pennsylvania and friend.
Yes, thank you so much. Welcome, Meg. I want to mention also your book. You wrote the book, Not If I Can Help It, A Family Lawyer's Battle for Justice for Victims of Domestic Violence and the Poor. Thank you so much, Meg, for being here today. I'd love for you to start off and maybe tell us a little bit about your background and your experience. You've practiced family law for more than 40 years. So what is your assessment of where we are and where we're going?
Yeah, I spent 37 of those years in family court handling custody and protection from abuse cases and divorces, and I can really, I could have said the same exact things that Danielle said as far as my experiences. In protection from abuse cases, some things have gotten a little better. There's a little better descriptions in some states of what involves abuse, because oftentimes judges only recognize abuse when there is like evidence of documented evidence of injuries. They look at severe physical abuse. They recognize that. But all the other kinds of forms of domestic violence that are so prevalent in these cases that involve coercive control, intimidation, threats, emotional abuse, financial deprivation, isolation, uh, depredation, sexual abuse, all those things. They just they're very hard to prove in some cases, or they just say, "Why doesn't the person leave?" Why, and they don't recognize all of the incredible barriers to leaving and how unsafe it can be for victims when they try to do it. Um, but I think the fundamental problem I see in custody cases is this bedrock, unshakable belief that it is in the best interest of children to have ongoing and consistent contact with both parents. It's like it's like gospel. Um, and it's a very dangerous belief because parents can be violent abusers. They can be sexual predators. They can present clear and present danger to their children and anybody else's children. And if it's anybody else's children, we can recognize that and say, don't go near that person. But if it's the parent, then it's there's this belief, and nobody wants to shake it, that it is in the best interest of children to spend time with that parent. And any kind of argument against it by a parent trying to protect is uh, is seen as going against what is, naturally right, and they are causing this problem by trying to protect the child. I've had cases where I had a case where the child was actually put in foster care because he refused to recant his testimony that his father repeatedly molested him, and his mother refused to stop trying to protect him. And so that's how they handled that. The child had threatened it. He would harm his father somehow if he was in his custody. So the father was actually afraid of him. So they put him in foster care instead. And I had a client whose child was murdered by the father after he was court ordered into his custody. It happens all the time. I know there was a study done recently that of 15 years between that ended in 2023, where close to 1,000 children were murdered in these kinds of circumstances, where they're being court ordered into dangerous situations because judges fail to prioritize the safety of the children and go to this parents' rights, that somehow parents uh, have this ownership right over children, regardless of how unsuitable those parents are. So I wrote my book, Not If I Can Help It, about a lot of the cases that I handled and trying to sort of educate people because people don't know, people don't understand, people have no idea, and they're usually shocked. And they don't, and once they realize, people try and take action. And that's the kind of thing that everyone has to do, try and change the laws. It's very important for judges to understand that the priority in the best interest of the child is in fact the best interest of the child, and that being placed in an unsafe situation is never in a child's best interest. And judges just need to be forced to be trained. They just have so many myths logical ideas about what's right and wrong. And so training is crucial. So Kayden's law, um, I think, is the key to trying to turn this around.
Thank you, Meg. I really appreciate that background. Next, I'd like to hear from Evangeline Stratton. She's the family law attorney and the former managing attorney at the Family Violence Appellate Project in Washington State. Welcome, Evangeline.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Like Ashley said, I am an attorney. I've practiced in the family court system for 15 years, both at the trial and at the appellate level. But what I'm more proud of actually is that I've worked with survivors of abuse for 25 years, ever since I was in college, as a volunteer, as a survivor advocate. And over that 25-year period, I've developed an expertise, I guess you would say, in custody cases where risk and abuse factors are present. Not only about the dynamics of abuse and in addition to that, the dynamics of abuse as they play out in family court with the various actors like Danielle mentioned, but the difference between folks who have access to legal knowledge and legal representation and those who do not. So when I was working as an advocate before law school, one of my dreams was that I wish I had a list of attorneys that I could refer these survivors to so they could have someone advocate for them who really gets it. And that just was not something that was available. And that's why I became a lawyer. I had a low bono practice when I first started off, which is still a private practice, but it's kind of like legal aid, but a sliding scale for folks. And then after that, I worked at a nonprofit where I was able to provide free legal assistance in appeals. But regardless, the problem is that when abuse is raised as an issue, responses from both social systems and legal systems often are not up to the task. They're reluctant or they're delayed, or the infrastructure just isn't there as far as what the law says. And if the law doesn't provide these protections, then it's not equal, right? Because if you don't have a lawyer, it's very unlikely that you are going to be able to navigate the system and get the protection that you need for yourself and for your children. Here in Washington State, which is where I am, but garnering national attention, many of you folks on the webinar probably are familiar with the Decker case, but even in the USA Today, they wrote an article titled "Death of Three Girls in Travis Decker's Custody is a Familiar Tragedy," right? Unfortunately, that's true. And they talk to Joan Meyer in the article. They go through some recent murders that have happened, which is the worst case scenario in these cases. But just the year before, in 2024, here in Washington, in central Washington, Elias Huizar murdered both mothers of his children in front of his children. Amber Rodriguez, who had spent years asking the family court for protection from her ex-husband, and Angela Santos, a minor, less than 18 years old, who had a child with Huizar, the same child that he kidnapped and fled with after murdering Angela. Now, Amber Rodriguez's family, surviving family, is bringing a lawsuit against the Yakima Police Department and the school district. Because what else is there to do? You don't have a right to appeal at that point because you've lost your life. And it shouldn't come to this point where the only way to hold systems accountable or to keep protective parents and children safe is a lawsuit for $50 million. So while appeals are an extremely important part of this system to fix problems that happen in family court, um, you know, 80% or more of folks go into the family court system, whether they like it or not, in private custody court, and they go in without a lawyer. Um, so the law needs to be protective again. And civil legal needs studies here in Washington state have consistently found that family court is one of the top legal issues that Washingtonians lack access to affordable legal representation. And just one more point. I'm currently teaching a family law class, and I have quickly realized that there is not enough that I can cover in 12 weeks to teach everything that a person would really need to know to navigate this system. So, access to quality representation by folks who really understand risk and safety is crucial.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Evangeline. Appreciate it. Next, please welcome Amanda Kippert. Amanda is the editor-in-chief at domesticshelters.org and the co-host of the podcast Toxic. Welcome, Amanda. Amanda, you've written about domestic violence for over a decade, and you've recently connected with protective parents who were actually jailed for trying to protect their children in family court. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and your experience and what you're learning about their experiences?
Yeah. Thank you for having me on here. I've been a journalist for about, well, pretty much my whole professional career, about 20 years as a freelance journalist. Um, I've done investigative reports for Huffington Post back when Melissa Jeltsin was there, and I've covered a lot of violence against women topics related to that, both for publications like that, as well as obviously domesticshelters.org, Toxic, and also hosted the podcast Voices of Hope for Alliance for Hope International, which people can find out now. And recently have been looking into this topic of protective mothers who have been sentenced to jail or in some cases prison for trying to protect their children in contested custody cases, which is just kind of crazy. And I feel like it's been happening with increased frequency. And the reasons I feel like this has been happening is because, well, there is a theory that with the women's rights movement over the last, I would say 50 to 60 years, giving women more resources and support to leave their abusive husbands, this so-called men's rights movement has to come up with sort of a counteraction to put more barriers in place for women. So they are claiming that their rights are being stripped away through parental alienation, which you may or may not have heard of. And so they are coming up with ways to find avenues to press charges against these protective mothers, saying that they are keeping their kids from them when actually the children, if they are old enough, are saying that they are afraid to go with these abusive fathers, or the mothers are presenting loads and loads of evidence saying that these fathers are abusive. They have videos, they have audio recordings, they have email messages, text messages, everything under the sun. And the judges are still either uninformed or, I would make an assumption to say, misogynistic, are going under the assumption that two parents are better than one and still siding with the abusive father to say that they are still allowed to have some sort of parental rights regardless of the so-called abuse, especially if the abuse was focused mainly on the mother. They are operating under this assumption that the abuse couldn't possibly carry over to the child, which we all know is just a load of crap. So they are still giving some of this time to the father. And when the mother hears this, a lot of times they will try to keep the child safe, as any mother would do, and then being penalized for that. At the end of last year, I pitched this story to national news outlets throughout the country. Not that domesticshelters.org doesn't have a fabulous reach, we do, but I did feel like this story could have um, gone larger to a larger audience than that, and it was politely rejected, which all of us freelance journalists are very familiar with. And I kind of wondered if some of these outlets may have been thinking that this wasn't as wide of an issue as it was. But I wanted to share today that uh, a dozen moms, and I'm sure that there are so many more, have reached out to me eager to share their stories. And the majority of them have spent time behind bars, with several others awaiting their trial to see if they will spend time behind bars. The majority of them have not seen their children in months, sometimes years, since they were sentenced to jail. They are scared, they're angry, they're desperate. They're afraid that the more time that goes by, the more likely it is that the abuser will eventually kill their child or that their child will take their own life. In all of these cases, the women were sentenced to jail for basically refusing the custody order by not turning the child over to the abusive parent. And in some cases, the child was old enough to flat out refuse to go. And any of us mothers who have children know that there's only so much you can do besides physically forcing a child to go. And that in itself, as you could imagine, would be absolutely heartbreaking, especially if you know that you are forcing a child to go to a man that is physically or sexually abusive to that child. Um, in some cases, these mothers have fled, have fled with the child to try to protect them, and they have hidden with the child for as long as they could. So I just wanted to name a couple of these women off using their first names only so you could get an idea of the wide reach of this problem. So these are all women that I've spoken to personally. Gina in Butler County, Ohio, spent a total of a year in jail at different times, starting in 2020, for hiding her child from her abusive ex-husband. Amy in Henderson, Kentucky, was sentenced to 7 days in jail in 2023. Susan in Collin County, Texas, spent 26 days in jail before being placed on an ankle monitor for 2 years for protecting her son. And I just also wanted to note that it should go without being said, but all of these women have proof of being abused by their husbands. Um, and as far as I know, none of these husbands ever saw jail time for their abuse. Dee in Adams County, Colorado, spent 8 weeks in jail and was sentenced to another 4 years of probation. Danielle in Guadalupe County, Texas, spent 2 days in jail after her husband tried to kill her. Heather in Pennsylvania, whose story we told in this month's article on domestic shelters, I'm happy to link it in the chat after this, served 41 days in jail in 2022. Tatum from Lehi, Utah, spent 5 days in jail while her husband received no punishment for strangling their child, an act that she was able to catch on camera. And then this one, which is especially mind-blowing, Michelle from Virginia watched helplessly as a judge sentenced her 14-year-old daughter to 2 weeks in jail for refusing to see her abusive father, letting her out only on Christmas Eve if she agreed to spend Christmas with her father.
Wow.
So I feel like shining a national spotlight on this issue could only increase the pressure on judges to uphold justice, listen to expert research, etc. I don't want to go ahead and assume that all these judges are bad people. I just think that there is a huge lack of education going on.
Yeah.
And that's why.
Anna.
What's
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, just thank you. That's it's such a powerful way to represent what you're seeing, and you're right. That is a short little percentage of what's actually out there, I'm sure. So thank you
Yeah.
for your work on that. I do want to keep moving along. We have next, I'd like to welcome Christy Camara. Christy is the mother of Wyland and the driving force behind Wyland's Law in California. She's also authored the book, Can I Still Be Funny? After My Son Was Murdered. Christy, thank you so much for joining us today. So glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. I apologize to gather myself after hearing all of those mothers that tried so terribly to avoid being in the situation that I myself and Kathy on this panel have been forced to be in. Again, my name is Christy Camara, and I'm Wyland's mom. I lost my only child, my 10-year-old son, Wyland, on March 2nd, 2020. He was murdered by his father, who then cowardly took his own life. Since that terrible day, we've been searching for what went wrong and how we can prevent this from happening again. Basically, the system failed us. In 2016, I obtained a protective order, which included a firearm prohibition. It wasn't transmitted to the Department of Justice until 9 months after it was issued, and just a couple weeks before it expired. Unfortunately, that gap in time allowed my ex-husband to legally purchase a firearm at a local gun store. That firearm was the weapon he eventually used to kill Wyland. A couple years after my son's murder, I wrote a book, Can I Still Be Funny After My Son's Murder? It is a book of memories before, during, and after Wyland's death, and basically how my life has been affected by his death. For example, Halloween before I had Wyland, Halloween taking him trick-or-treating, and now Halloween brings a little PTSD when I see the yellow caution tape up as a Halloween decoration. And unfortunately, I did have to stumble upon the caution tape at the scene of the crime as I drove up to pick my son up to school and was rerouted to the police department. My book shares my grief, my obstacles, and a little humor that I use to get through the day. My hope is that someone experiencing the same domestic abuse, which up until 2 years after Wyland's murder, I had no idea I was a domestic abuse victim until it was brought to my attention. I'm hoping that somebody can recognize the signs and also see the signs of someone capable of committing filicide. And hopefully they're able to stop it before another innocent child's life is taken. In April of this year, we introduced Wyland's Law, AB 1363, to the state of California. This law reaffirms that courts must immediately transmit protective orders to the Department of Justice. This law gives victims fast, easy access to prove their order was received through an automated system at the Department of Justice. It also prevents deadly gaps in enforcement, like the one that led to my son's death. On October 10th, 2025, we're proud to say that Governor Newsom signed Wyland's Law into California law. I also spend time advocating. In January of 2024, I joined Pierce's Pledge. We're a nonprofit organization focused on safe gun storage, and gun violence prevention. In 2021, our founder, Leslie Hughes' son, Pierce, was murdered by his father, just like Wyland. Unfortunately, one child a week is murdered by a parent or a step-parent. As the director of operations, I'm able to advocate in memory of both Wyland and of Pierce. I want to thank you for allowing me to share my story with you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christy. Really appreciate you being here and sharing your experience, because it just, it's unimaginable, but to be able to connect with you in this way really drives it home, right? This isn't something that is affecting, or even if it were just one person, but this is so much more widespread than anyone really understands. As someone that's on the outside looking in, the more that I learn about what's actually going on, the more and more outraged that I become. And conversations like this are so important for that. So thank you for being a part of it. On that note, I do want to turn it over to Kathy, who has, unfortunately shares something in common with Christy in that she also lost a child. Kathy, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'll turn it over to you for you to share your story as much as you feel comfortable doing and kind of how you've turned that into action.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Christy, I'm sorry for your loss. I've not formally met you before, but I am familiar with Leslie. I am good friends with her, and bravo to you guys getting that passed. I don't even know where to begin today. My child wasn't killed with a gun. She was one of the very few. What do we do? Ban dumbbells in every country or zip ties in every state. You know what I mean? As much as that part comes into play with how they harm the kids, it goes a little bit deeper than that, especially with the Decker case. I don't know. Evangeline, did I meet you in Seattle? I don't. Don't remember. I was wearing a Shamu sweater. It was very embarrassing when I popped off at the FBI guy. But the whole aspect with that was they didn't issue an Amber Alert. Same with Kayden. They didn't issue an Amber Alert. They want to hide behind why they didn't do that. I know the truth of why they didn't. It's because it came down to resources, and they could have saved those kids, and they could have saved Kayden. I don't know what part you all want to talk to me about. Every other day I have to get another lady out of jail. Amanda, I'm with you on that. I get calls from all over the country. And I've had to unjail multiple women. It's unbelievable to me that we're even doing this, that Julie, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about her case, is facing 12 and a half years in jail. And someone was like, well, it was 25. No, that's not okay. She's not going to jail for 12 and a half years. The fact that she had a $500,000 bond, somebody needs to start talking about this, right? Ashley, you guys do the strangulation protocols. Thank you so much for that. I am a nurse, and I think the only state in this entire country that is actually doing something about strangulation protocols is New Jersey. I mean, what does that say to you guys? As an ER nurse, we used to look at our patients to be like, oh, we don't see bruises. And I mean, Danielle can attest to this. Angelina Jolie, she was a very huge advocate for the UV lights, etc. And I can say when I worked in my last job in New Jersey, that protocol showed up in my ER, and they stopped staring at women and said, you have up to a year to die, up to a year to dissect from post-strangulation. And it came from probably you're the only one in the country teaching it. So bravo to whoever did that. But I can tell you that there's 50 states in this country, and there's one state in this entire country that has changed their protocol to now. And this may sound like weird. I'll explain this at a later date. We now do CTAs of these necks, right? Before we used to do maybe an x-ray. We would look at you. That's huge. Now we're looking at the vessels of your neck, because now we're look back at all the women that, some of the advocates that we know that have died, and say, oh my God, they reported strangulation 3 weeks prior and they dropped dead. Did anybody look at their autopsies? We're not even looking at that, because they have up to a year to dissect and die from being strangled. That's huge. I've been screaming about strangulation for the past 7 years. I was strangled 3 times. You have an 800% chance of being murdered. And I feel like that is something that we need to take into consideration, instead of being like, I don't see any bruises on your neck. Sorry, I don't believe you, especially in the darker skin population, which Angelina was a very huge advocate on. Well, I don't care if you don't see anything. You're not going to see anything for days. The UV cameras have showed up in New Jersey, and you can see petechiae on the top of your mouth, where before we weren't looking, and around your eyes, which is a whole huge strangulation thing, and you have an 800 chance of being murdered. So I have said to my patients that I will pull the curtain shut and be like, I don't know if this is something that I should say or go about, but they will kill you. You're going to get murdered. Get out. And also, we're not teaching this to women. Another thing with the guns that I said to Leslie, I said, I love what you guys are doing with the gun reform. Why does nobody, not one female that I know, own a gun? Why are we not talking about that? We don't have equal rights in this country, but we have the Second Amendment right, ladies? Do any of you own a gun or know how to shoot one? I don't. Sorry, but I don't. We have the right to protect ourselves and our children, right? But we're not doing it. And why is that? That's a huge problem to me, because had I known, I could tell you right now that I would have protected myself and my children from that man. And I didn't. My lawyer advised me one time, and I said, I think you'd be a little crazy here, buddy. Like, I don't have a gun. I'm not here to like, and I don't ever want one. But as women, we have that right, and we're not teaching it. We're not teaching our daughters to protect themselves, our friends, anyone. I knew one girl with a gun. I had to tell her to get out of her class because it was going to be used against her. Like, that's disgusting to me. Anyway, I could go over strangulation, guns, all that other stuff. But I think that us screaming from the mountaintops and keep continuing to what you guys are doing is going to only be the one thing that's going to change, because they've tried to jail me 5 times, maybe 6. Literally. I get arrested almost every year on August 6th. They come to my house and try to arrest me over credit cards that I've had like 27 years ago. I'm not exaggerating. So finally, I'm like, just put me in the jail. Like, just put me in there. Someone get me out. Not that fast. I need like a little bit of a break. Like, I told Danielle, get my fake Louis Vuitton, show up with the dollar bills and the pennies for my $100,000 bond and make them count it. Like, just to be like, because I know it's coming. Just get me out. The people that I get out, how I get out, I have a bail's bondman that I went to college with. Call up Brent, have him get me out as well, and we'll move on.
What
Like,
were the grounds that they're trying to arrest you? And you mentioned credit cards. Is this related to family court and your experience?
no, they
Is it
only
still like,
happened. It happened the day after I met the president. Woo, shocker, right? Like, wow, all of a sudden I have a warrant for my arrest from a credit card from 1997. Literally, I have it on camera. So it was March 16th that we went to the White House, and they showed up 2 days later. And then every year, when they know that something's about, like, when just before Pennsylvania passed Kayden's law, they tried to arrest me. Like, I'm not even making this up for stupid reasons. One was the water. Like, they just are out to kind of, they know. And I'm just like, I know y'all hate me at this point. Ask me if I care. That's why people come to me, because I can still yap and talk. And that's why I can yap off in a chamois sweater in Washington. And they can't do anything. Well, they can, but they really can't. Like, they know that I can talk and say whatever I want because I don't have anything to lose. Like, my child's gone. Like, what are they going to do to me? They know they can't put me in jail. They know they can't gag me. They know they can't tell me to shut up. They know that I can talk. And that's why people still come to me. They'll probably take me out one day. Danielle knows what to do. Like, you're going to have to, like, still take me to Home Goods in my wheelchair, but
Your parents
I'll just add, we do have an annual event at the courthouse,
yeah.
Pennsylvania, the courthouse that ordered Kayden to her death.
And every year I have an armed guard come with me. And this year I said, just we didn't publicize it because of all this stuff that's going on in this crazy country. I'm like, what am I gonna do? Like, have my armed guard shoot the guy shooting me? Like, just forget it. Like, I know this sounds insane, but it's true. Like, how many of us have been killed or taken out for speaking out? And we can fear that, or we can just continue to go on. And I'm not afraid of them. They can say they're gonna wood chip us. I'll wood chip you right back, Kenneth. I don't care. I don't even know how to use a wood chipper, but let's learn. Like, this is what we deal with every day.
right? And what I'm hearing in your voice is just a dumbfoundness of like what the craziness of the system and what is going on. There's no sense of it, and there is a massive power imbalance, right? Like,
Why am I the most hated mother in the country for saying that kids should be safe? Has anyone thought about that? Like, why do I have the most haters on the planet? If you don't believe me, go look at my Facebook and see. Like, I had more haters in Utah, and this sounds horrible, than Charlie Kirk did. And I do. Utah wants to get me. And I told Lynn or Leah, I said, Leah, you better get Utah in check. Like, I don't know what's going on with your people, but I'm going to cross that state right off my list. And next time I go to Arizona, I was told the lady the other day, it's like, you guys better put the metal detectors in the front of the building versus the back of the building. Because, like, I'm never coming back to speak there again. And she's like, I've already taken care of it. It's good, because when I was standing in that room testifying over 100 people, I'm looking around like, this is not safe. And in Pennsylvania, we had to move our like rally inside through the guards because we knew like it's getting unsafe. And I'm saying everyone out there, be safe. Because you have to really be careful, because I've had women murdered after my rallies, like really upsetting things. And yeah, I can continue to yap, but I still have to be a little bit careful. And I, want to just extend to all of you, just, it's a little scary out there right now, and just to be careful.
Yeah.
I will survive, and I'll end up in the wheelchair, but you all better take me to Home Goods. But honestly, just be
I'd
careful.
like to take kind of what you're sharing about this, dangerous climate of people who are willing to speak out. And, we're in a room full of people who are speaking out and who are fighting for justice for women. I'd love to hear from, anyone else that's on the panel about anything that you've experienced in terms of when you go to speak up and you try to make change and make the laws, what kind of pushback are you seeing? And, what does that look like for you? Danielle, I see you came up. You go ahead if you have something to add.
Yeah, we get a fair amount of pushback. We certainly get a lot of, attacks on social media, of course. But we also, I mean, we've gone with bodyguards when we go to testify in legislature sometimes. We, have been in situations where we're testifying and people are showing us their weapons, not as they're not shooting us, but it's a veiled threat. Kathy mentioned, we had an advocate who came to one of the rallies for Kayden's Law in Pennsylvania, and she was, I think, sort of newly coming out in public and talking about her situation. She had two little kids. I think they were 5 and 7 at the time, and she was in the address confidentiality program, so her abuser couldn't find where she lived. So that's how dangerous he was. And yet, family court had ordered some shared custody. So she had to send her little children to him on the weekends, and they were very scared to go. And when the children went to the visitation, the father, who had, brutally abused her many times and threatened to kill her, he would ask the children questions about where they lived. What store do you live by? Or do you live by a park? Or what's your name of your school? So he was sort of questioning the children. And the little girl, who was only 5, eventually succumbed, of course, not on purpose. She's just a little child. And she let some information slip that was enough for him to figure out where they were living. And this had happened at the visit that was just before this rally that we were holding for Kayden, and the mom was there and she was telling me about this. She said, I'm enthusiastic about the advocacy that's happening and the protections that Kayden's Law is, coming to Pennsylvania. I want to help. I want to be vocal, but I'm also scared. But I'm also, I feel less isolated, and I want to get involved. But then she was telling me the story and she said, my daughter was shaking and she was saying, I'm so sorry, Mom, I didn't mean to tell him. And she said, I'm scared, but I'm hopeful. And then that night, she was murdered in her house. And, you know, a different man who knew the father was convicted for it.
It was a reaction to a marijuana cookie, an adverse reaction. Adverse reactions are not murder. It's like
That's
an
what
itch
they
or a
concluded.
rash.
That's what
Okay.
they concluded. It's
This was
suspicious.
the article. I was like, oh wow. So now that if you take marijuana cookies and you murder someone and like it's okay, it's just it's like an adverse reaction to a medicine or anything is like I got an itch, I got a rash. Not murder. Not
Yeah.
murder.
And so what happened afterwards, of course, once the productive mom was killed horrifically, um, the children were in limbo. And, up until she was killed, they would only go to him supervised. That's how dangerous he was. And after she was murdered, he had full parental rights. And so he took both the children. Her family tried to keep them, but they didn't have, such legal standing as the paternal father, the biological father. And so the children had to go and live with him. We don't know if he did kill the mother or arranged to have her killed, but it's quite possible. He had threatened to kill her many times and he was seeking to find her address. He had just found it out. And the only reason he found it out is because the family court had ordered this forced contact, and then he was coercing the children. So I think a lot of times family courts don't think about these implications. They're just thinking very baseline, okay, dad needs some custody time. But the level of risk
Yeah.
that it creates for the survivors is so incredibly high, sometimes resulting in death. And these things are preventable. If we actually did prioritize children's safety above everything else, these orders wouldn't be happening and it wouldn't place survivors in such vulnerable situations. So that's why we continue to work on this. But it can be dangerous to advocate, and I know Kathy gets threats all the time. I don't know if you have had that experience, Christy, but it is common for people who, if they get vocal about the situation, there's a significant pushback usually.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I do want to take the last, we have about 8 minutes left. We'll try to wrap up here a little before the end of the hour. To talk about the solutions, right? We've talked about Kayden's law. We've talked about Weiland's law. What are the solutions out there? Obviously, if you want to touch more on the legislative side of things, advocacy side, there's a lot that you can go out there. So, Meg, if you have the most experience here in this room, I'd love to hear your thoughts to start, and then we'll, as time allows, try to get around the room. We'll unmute you here, Meg.
Oh, my
There you
dog
are.
was barking, so I put it on mute.
You're good.
I think that the provisions in Kayden's law are like really very brilliantly designed. I think they cover probably as many things as you can cover in terms of legislative change, in forcing courts to have more understanding and to care. Um, there, I do think that we very much need to have more psychologists who come in as experts to be able to do that pro bono, or this new term low bono. I'd never heard that one before. And as an old timer, they don't seem to be enough of them to be able to get people to do that. And I've always seen good results when a really good expert comes in and testifies on behalf of the child and the victim. But most people can't afford them. And I wish there could be some sort of campaign to get them. I think there's more lawyers that do it than therapists. And I come across therapists who understand about domestic violence, but they don't do custody evaluations. They're afraid of court. Maybe there would be some kind of program we could have in which we would make them less afraid so that they would be more willing to participate in that. But I think just the judges don't understand. They have these antiquated ideas. I mean, we come historically from uh, a country where abuse of women and children was perfectly legal. There's all kinds of case law about it. It was chastisement of an unruly wife, and it was discipline. And we still use the word discipline with children. We're still allowed to beat children when we're disciplining them. As long as they don't get some permanent injury, or we don't, kill them. The Child Protective Services laws often allow unbelievable amount of abuse. So I think that educating judges, and in Pennsylvania, we're not allowed to educate our judges. It's against the Pennsylvania Constitution to educate your judges. We got to do something about the Constitution in Pennsylvania, because that's a ridiculous kind of law to be against the law to be educated. And having people who know what they're talking about and who care about children being the people who testify and make decisions or suggestions to the judge about what kind of custody arrangements there should be. And of course, the fight against misogyny is ongoing.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks, Meg. We have some questions coming in here. Actually, Sabrina raised their hand. I don't know if we can pull people off mute, so I'm going to try that. Okay, I'm going to allow you to talk, and it sounds like you probably have a question. Oh, hand went down. Never mind. Then let's turn over to Evangeline. Anything to add on that in terms of solutions?
Yes, I have lots of ideas. In Washington State, over the last year or so, there have been legislators who have advocated for Kayden's law. Unfortunately, they weren't successful, and hopefully we'll try again. Another model legislative policy and guidance that is out there that we were advocating for is what's called the Model Code on domestic and family violence. The code itself is great, but it's the commentary to that code which could really help educate family court judges and professionals about coercive control, what's really going on, how to assess risk, how to build in safety to parenting plans or custody orders. So I think that is a solution. It doesn't necessarily mean adopting it in its entirety, but it is really useful guidance, and it's based on research, just like Kayden's is. The other solution, I think, is we need to listen to kids more. And across the country, every state's custody laws are different, including when it comes to whether children have a voice. So I think that's something that we should be looking at too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I don't have time to give everyone kind of a minute to say any final words because we're going to hop off and do a different session on a different link, which I know Danielle has put in the chat for anyone that wants to join the session 2 of this conversation. But I do just want to take a moment to thank all of you for attending and listening in and giving your listening so that way hopefully you can share this message with the people that listen to you. So thank you all very much for being here and have a wonderful day. I'll say to everyone on this panel, check your email. There's a link to join that second session. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.